Olá, boa noite. O Exou Biribó, hoje com o vídeo 6 de Sinking Island. Pelo laudo cadavérico, finalmente as suspeitas se afastam um pouco de Baína. Se acaso ela participou mesmo do crime, terá sido na condição de cúmplice e não de autora, já que a morte foi causada por um tiro de rifle disparado da janela da biblioteca. E por falar em rifle, foi bem nessa identificação da arma que ontem paramos no momento de impasse. E embora eu esteja mais do que acostumado com impasses pela minha incompetência em descobrir as coisas, é a primeira vez na vida, primeira vez na face da Terra, que eu chego a um impasse por excesso de competência. Como a gente já tinha identificado a arma, tanto a Bá quanto eu queríamos fazer as impressões digitais, tentamos de todo jeito. Mas o jogo não permite a extração das digitais até que se crie uma falsa dificuldade pela existência de um outro rifle Winchester na mesma galeria de armas. Então, primeiro vamos fazer as outras coisas que eu vi também que tem que fazer. Tem que usar um pedaço do papel aqui no óleo de linhaça para juntar algo nas provas do caso. Um pouco de azeite de linhaça vertido num pedaço de papel. Isso cria uma mancha alaranjada. E acho que tinha alguma coisa alaranjada lá nas roupas dele também, né? Para dizer que foi desse rifle que saiu a bala, não sei ainda. Aqui é o trapo que ele passou na arma e descobriu que ela tinha sido recém-disparada, né? A pólvora queimada nesse trapo prova que a arma de onde provém foi usada recentemente. E agora pega o próprio óleo de linhaça. Uma garrafa de óleo de linhaça achada no armário dos fuzis de Walter Jones. E agora vamos àquele procedimento. A gente tem que fingir que ainda não sabe qual é o rifle e clicar nessa Winchester aqui.
Here, one more 270 Winchester. It's getting complicated.
Ó, agora está ficando complicado, eu não sei mais que foi aquela arma que está raspada, como os pedaços de madeira que a gente achou no peitoril da janela, e nem que ela foi recém-disparada. A gente estava preocupado em achar essa outra e que dizer, nossa, agora como é que eu vou descobrir? Vou jogar essas duas armas fora, já que eu não sei qual foi. E agora então vamos tentar fazer digitais nessa daqui.
Here, one more 270 Winchester. It's getting complicated.
Com o pano que ele vai dizer que não tem.
No trace.
Olha lá, nenhuma marca, nenhuma digital. Agora vamos lá na Winchester verdadeira.
It's better if I take the prints first.
Melhor primeiro tomar as digitais. Ah, que cara esperto. Olha lá, agora ele pôs a digital e vai tirar uma foto.
Fingerprints on a weapon. This reeks of an amateur. The smooth wood of this weapon rubbed against a rugged surface. Strange, Mr. Jones, that a man as careful as you left such an ugly scrape on your beautiful rifle. The wood of the stock is still dripping with flax oil.
Agora ele pegou a arma, mas não apareceu a tradução aqui do que ele falou. Vamos então ouvir pegar a impressão digital do advogado. E de todos os outros. A não ser que já seja do advogado mesmo.
I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
But of course, do your job, Inspector.
Thanks.
Olhar no PPA a arma, o que diz? um rifle de ferrolho com uma câmera 270 WSM e uma mira telescópica Czech 3x10x56. Tem o mesmo calibre que a bala que matou Walter Jones e foi usada recentemente. Impressão digital de Noland. Um arranhão em um dos rifles de Walter Jones. Estranho para alguém que parecia cuidar tanto das armas. Imagem das impressões digitais no rifle. Quem tocou essa arma? Vamos ver se foi o advogado. Eu sempre aperto errado isso aqui. É nesta daqui, nessa comparação. A digital da arma e a digital do Noland.
Correct match.
But why did you manipulate this rifle, Hubert de Noland?
De primeira. Isso perde a graça, daí eu deixo de colher as impressões dos outros.
From now on, you have to show more cooperation, because I am officially investigating a murder.
Vou perguntar para ele da autópsia.
You are not a forensic expert, right? So you can't help me at all in interpreting Walter Jones' autopsy report.
Indeed, I won't be of great help to you, Inspector. In any case, I'm extremely surprised that Walter was shot down like a common rabbit. It's utterly stupefying.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
I'm extremely surprised by what you're telling me, Inspector. This means Baena couldn't have killed him by throwing him down from the top of the cliff. But you will admit, nothing proves that she didn't finish off poor Walter with a shot. And her father, old Collio, could very well have helped her.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
With all due respect, Inspector, let me remind you that I have already explained myself to you.
If the heirs had thought of inheriting, it seems they're off to a rather rocky start. What do you think?
I'll be frank with you, Inspector. Walter Jones was a man I esteemed and respected. But that Walter Jones of whom I speak disappeared long before his death. The truth is that he lost all sense of reality after his terrible accident. The fact of having become handicapped and nailed to his wheelchair made him paranoid and subject to monstrous bouts of rage. Walter Jones became a predator, obsessed by the idea that his own heirs wanted to deprive him of his fortune. He turned into an ogre toward his own descendants. He did all the dirty things one can imagine. He stopped short of nothing to hurt them. And his last act was to manipulate them, to stop them from putting him legally under psychiatric care, by making them believe that they'd inherit from him. I knew that no will existed in their favor, but what could I have done? You should know, Inspector, that Jones considered Sonia and Billy to be a pair of good-for-nothings. And if he believed briefly in Marco, in the end he concluded that the latter was a failure too, because he refused to break off with Christina, whom Walter believed to be an unscrupulous gold digger.
This man was a damn maniac. He seemed to fuss over these weapons with great diligence.
Walter Jones was a great hunter who did not let anyone take care of the maintenance of his guns. He shut himself for long hours in his office. Later, the whole room smelled of flax oil that he used abundantly to shine the wood of his rifles. I surprised him cleaning his guns the very afternoon of his death when I joined him for work.
Agora vão querer dizer que a arma então foi atirada pelo próprio Walter Jones de tarde antes de morrer, treinando na janela?
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
No doubt about it. This one looks a lot like it.
This family photo is very touching. I imagine that you learned to shoot because you have a gun in your hands?
Well, this photo was taken in Tanzania. That year I was very much part of the hunting party, even though I never liked to shoot animals. At the time, Walter loved taking his grandchildren on safari. He maintained that it contributed to their education.
Explain to me why this gun has your fingerprints, Mr. Noland.
I knew that I ought to have told you from the beginning, but I was afraid that you would suspect I was the murderer. When I saw that something was turning out badly between Baina and Walter, I took this rifle and I removed the eyepiece to observe what was going on. I was more than 200 meters away, and it was thanks to this rifle scope that I could distinguish Baina, who was pushing Walter over the edge. But the idea of shooting at Walter never crossed my mind. Why would I have killed him? He who made my career and generously remunerated me for my services.
You already lied to me. Now you want me to believe that you did not make use of this gun? How do you want me to believe you again, Noland?
Historinha muito mal contada, né? Pro meu gosto. Noland disse que usou o rifle para mirar através da mira telescópica. Pegou o rifle só para tirar a mira telescópica para observar o entrevero no mirante.
Okay, and supposing I believe you used the rifle as binoculars and not as a weapon, who could have taken the rifle after you and shot Walter Jones?
I didn't run into anyone when I left my office. I'm the only one left in the tower who has a key card to enter this office. I don't understand how Walter Jones could have been killed by this rifle. Please, believe me.
Ele é o único que tem o cartão para entrar na habitação, na biblioteca. Mas ele disse há pouco que o arquiteto é que tem o cartão mestre para entrar em todos os aposentos da torre. Então, se não foi ele, se por acaso não foi ele mesmo, com todo esse ar de culpado e todas as pistas contra ele, tem que ser o arquiteto então. E eu disse que incriminar o que parece mais culpado não é uma tática dos escritores e dos roteiristas, mas isso ficou tão comum de não ser o que parece que foi, que hoje em dia, para surpreender a audiência, o resultado do crime de mistério é ser justamente aquele que desde o começo parece que era o culpado. Isso surpreende toda a plateia. Foi roubada a corrente que W. Jones levava no seu pescoço? E se foi, por quê?
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
That evening, I have to admit I didn't pay attention, Inspector. But he usually wore a sort of chain around his neck.
Thank you for the information.
E agora ainda tenho que ouvir os outros sobre alguma coisa, agora que eu já tenho as impressões. A Bá queria saber se dá para comparar o rifle com os pedacinhos de madeira. Dá sim. Tá aqui os pedacinhos de madeira e o rifle.
Correct match.
Correto. A gente ainda não tem ideia de quem levou a corrente. Então a gente ainda tem que ouvir as pessoas. Vamos lá na cozinha então pegar a faca para abrir a gaveta do escritório. Uma das gavetas. Cozinha lá pro outro lado, a outra escadaria.
The ocean has covered the whole island.
E a água já invadiu tudo aqui. Se fosse naquele sistema de corrida contra o tempo, as provas já estariam muito sumidas aqui. E a gente teria que usar a tática da Tigu nos aeroportos com a mãe dela. É melhor a gente correr, mamãe. Vamos lá para a cozinha, então. Um deles resolveu secar tudo ali no rodo. Salvar o prédio no rodo. Tem uma gaveta aqui que dá ação.
I will certainly be able to use this for something.
Isso me servirá para algo. Uma faca. Pontiaguda e afiada.
I warn you, the rules have changed. I am the inspector officially in charge of the investigation of the murder of Walter Jones, and I therefore have all powers at my disposal to bring this investigation to a close.
Ok, anotado.
You are not a forensic expert, right? So you can't help me at all in interpreting Walter Jones' autopsy report.
Sorry, Norm. Your autopsy report is from the butcher's shop. It makes me want to throw up.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
What are you saying? They shot the old man? Wow, we're swimming in a real crime novel now, Norm. And I bet you're going to conduct an investigation and unmask the guilty party, right?
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I played poker with Martin and Christina between 9:45 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. And of course, I had a row with my wife, who made a scene because of it. She hates the game. I asked myself how I can still tolerate her. Sonia and Martin, they fought over something petty. I can't remember what it was. In any case, Sonia was really tense. She left to calm down a little. And it was her, I stress it was her, who came back for our grandfather. She was beside herself with worry that he should be out in such horrible weather. We discussed it and said that we better check out where the old guy was. It was 11:30 p.m., and it was then that Nolan burst into the room telling us that our grandfather was dead.
A Sônia que saiu. Pode ter sido ela, então, a roubar a corrente para pegar a chave.
With regard to Walter Jones, everyone plays the victim. But some people didn't refrain from trying to make him fall from his perch.
Oh, you know I didn't take part in this thing wholeheartedly. Sonia and Martin had their reasons, and I had mine.
Well, if you had thought you would inherit, it seems to me that this is in a little danger.
Helping for grandfather's estate is like betting on a bad hand. One has little chance of winning. I'm a gambler. I counted on it anyway. I shouldn't have.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
Well, it was our only chance to recoup our grandfather's estate. Well, as I said, my grandfather brought Sonia and me together in his office to sign this paper. He made an impossibly huge fuss about how he had fired all his staff and how it was a call for help. He wanted us to take care of him and pamper him. Us, his cherished grandchildren. See what kind of guy he is? We asked to see his will, but what do you think? What play acting when I think back. He was a big bluffer, the old man. He wouldn't have been bad at poker.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
Well done, Inspector. That's the chain.
This family photo is very touching. I imagine that you learned to shoot because you have a gun in your hands?
Oh yeah, I remember. Sometimes it was really fun. I was a kid, and the lions and the elephants and all that, it suited me fine. But hunting? No. Really not my thing. You had to walk for hours and hours to finally come face to face with a beast that wanted nothing to do with you. My grandfather took me for a moron because I was no good at it.
If Noland is to be believed, the young Baina literally cast a spell on Walter Jones. What do you know about this?
I don't know anything about it at all. With grandfather, I didn't speak about most things, and certainly not about sex.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I didn't pay a lot of attention, but I remember that my grandfather always wore a small chain. Ever since he built this tower, I always saw him wearing a chain. Of that, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Agora ele não pode ir na cabana, né? Tá tudo alagado. Ou ele pode ir pulando aqui. Corre para a pedra seca. Não tem pedra seca nenhuma por aqui. Para ir na cabana agora só se for de helicóptero. Mas a cabana deve ter afundado. É a parte mais baixa da ilha. Ela ficou sozinha aqui.
At present, no more laughing. I am the representative of judicial authority on this island, and I have a murder on my hands. You are not a forensic expert, right? So you can't help me at all in interpreting Walter Jones' autopsy report.
Indeed, Mr. Norm. And your investigation is in danger of taking a difficult turn. I suppose that now you suspect each one of us.
Claro, principalmente de você, senhoritica.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baina has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
It's a nightmare. My grandfather killed by a bullet, but I don't understand. It's not possible.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I was at the restaurant between 9:45 p.m. and 11 p.m. First, I cleared the table with Billy and Clara. Since there was no more staff, we were obviously obliged to cope by ourselves, weren't we? After this, I watched a bit of television with Martin. Billy was bored stiff and suggested we play poker. Outside of poker, you know, I don't think anything else exists for my brother. Clara had a row with him, as usual, and the mood deteriorated. On top of that, poker bores me. So, Martin, Christina, and Billy began a hand, and I went up to Lorenzo's studio. Up there, the view is spectacular. I wanted to watch the storm which had started to lash the island. I always loved storms. I was alone. Lorenzo was not there. I helped myself to a drink. But let me point out to you right away, Inspector, I could not see the coastal path. Lorenzo's studio does not overlook that part of the island at all. After a while, Lorenzo was still not back, and I'd had enough. Don't misunderstand me, Mr. Norm. I wanted to chat with him. There's no ambiguity in our relationship. He's an eccentric fellow and a little cuckoo, and I wanted a change of air. I came back down to the restaurant, and I found Billy, Martin, and Christina still in the thick of it. And the sight was intolerable. Billy almost ruined his life with poker, and it's very painful for me to watch him play like an addict. Christina had left to go to bed. Martin wanted to read a manuscript for his publishing house, and he went back to our room. The storm had excited me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I stayed on with Billy and Clara. We talked. At one moment I remember we stopped because it was thundering so loudly. It was really impressive. You could see the landscape across the panoramic window like in broad daylight. And I started to worry about our grandfather. After all, he was an old man, and it bothered me to know that he was outside in weather like that. I asked myself what he was up to. Finally, I told Billy that we had to go and check things out. He asked me to first give him one last whiskey. My brother was also an alcoholic, Mr. Norm, you'll realize soon enough. So I poured him a glass, and I served myself a glass of wine to keep him company. We talked about this and that till 11:30 p.m. We'd almost forgotten about Grandfather.
With regard to Walter Jones, everyone plays the victim. But some people didn't refrain from trying to make him fall from his perch.
I'm not the one who started this procedure, Inspector. It is Hubert de Noland who suggested this to Billy and me. I acknowledge that I supported and signed this procedure, but please understand me. Noland saw my grandfather often, which was not the case with me. I thought he was telling the truth about my grandfather turning senile.
Well, if you had thought you would inherit, it seems to me that this is in a little danger.
I didn't have any illusions about my grandfather for a long time, Mr. Norm, and this repugnant letter only reinforces my convictions. Walter Jones is good and proper, one of the biggest jerks I know.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
Listen, Mr. Norm, I don't want to tell you tales. It was a give and take between us. My grandfather was rewriting his will in our favor, something which is utterly normal and which happens in every family in the world, I'll allow myself to remind you, in exchange for which Billy and I accepted to sign this paper. My grandfather manipulated us one more time. He took us for a big ride. In my view, we'll get nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
I wouldn't stake my life on it, but this chain looks very much like the one my grandfather had.
This family photo is very touching. I imagine that you learned to shoot because you have a gun in your hands?
My God, you're bringing back memories, Inspector. I had forgotten this. It was nevertheless marvelous. My grandfather took us to a hunting reserve in Tanzania. There, Walter Jones was like a child. Yes, it's one of the best memories I will keep of him. His childlike laughter during the safari.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
Yes, I remember that my grandfather wore a small chain. I am certain, Mr. Norm.
Okay, very well.
Eu acho que a máquina está encrencada e ela está batendo tanto, tentando tanto, é porque a chave ficou no bolso da roupa dela e está presa lá na máquina. Já que ela é a minha maior suspeita de volta. E ela foi até o terraço do Lorenzo naquela noite, ele não estava, então foi de lá que ela atirou. É a mesma vista da biblioteca, será?
Lorenzo, I got the Rogatory Commission along with all the powers that go with it. And I need a key card that opens all the doors in this tower.
No problem. Here, take this. It belongs to an employee who had access to all the rooms in the tower. And then, find the guilty party as fast as you can, Inspector.
Thanks, Lorenzo.
Ganhou a tarjeta para entrar em tudo.
I warn you, the rules have changed. I am the inspector officially in charge of the investigation of the murder of Walter Jones, and I therefore have all powers at my disposal to bring this investigation to a close. You are not a forensic expert, right? So you can't help me at all in interpreting Walter Jones' autopsy report.
I'm not sure where the bullet was shot from, but it certainly reached its target with frightful precision. I won't hide that I'm quite scared by this murderer, and I can't help you, Norm.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
Oh, that's great news. Baena's cleared of all suspicion. It's fully to your credit that you recognized your mistake, Norm. I imagine that you weren't at all aware of the arm that was used in the crime, Inspector.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
But I already told you, Norm. I hated Mr. Jones for what he did to Baina. But despite everything, I'm sorry for the death of the old man, believe me. I remember being surprised by Baina's violence. Even if I could understand that she was taking revenge for Jones's beastly brutality. After his fall, I came out of my hiding place to reassure Baina. I promised her that I would protect her. I was ready to give evidence that the old satyr had assaulted her again, but Baina pushed me away and fled to take refuge in her father's cabin. At that moment, I confess, I was convinced that she'd intentionally pushed him, that she'd ruminated over taking revenge against Jones, and that if she'd agreed to accompany her torturer on his stroll, it wasn't totally innocent. In fact, I thought maybe she was waiting for a chance to revenge herself. And now, Inspector, you're telling me that Baina is innocent. Oh, now I am sure that she must detest me for having thought her guilty.
This man was a damn maniac. He seemed to fuss over these weapons with great diligence.
Mr. Jones was a long-time hunter, Norm. And like all self-respecting hunters, he took great care of his guns.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
I can corroborate that, Norm. It was this chain.
What could this bottle of flax oil have been used for?
This flax oil is used to take care of the stocks of the luxurious rifles belonging to my boss, Inspector. It's an absolutely sensational product for bringing out the veins in precious woods.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I remember very well that Mr. Jones always wore his chain around his neck. Why would he have taken it off? It had the key to his room and to his safe hung from it.
You've helped me a lot. Thank you.
Será que agora eu posso ver o mirante aqui da sala dele? Agora que a Sônia elogiou tanto. E ele diz, preciso perguntar por que ele usa esse equipamento. E não pergunta.
I have to ask Lorenzo what this machine is used for.
Isso é que nem o panfleto lá com as anotações técnicas. Deveria consultar o arquiteto. E ele pergunta para todo mundo menos para o
Tower of
arquiteto.
Segura is in distress. Help, please respond. The Segura Tower is in distress. Help, please respond. The Segura Tower is in distress. Help, respond. Nothing. Nothing. Nothing.
The hurricane must have damaged the radio connections, and the rescuers must be overwhelmed.
Oh my God, it has been 2 hours I've been shrieking into this goddamn transmitter, and I'm not picking anything up. Hey, wait, here it is. I think I found something. Provided that Segura Tower is in distress. Help, please respond. This is Lorenzo Battaglieri.
Captain Clams here from Sale Base to the Tower of Segura. I receive you. Do you hear me?
The Tower of Segura here. I'm Lorenzo Battaglieri, and I receive you. I'm asking for the immediate evacuation. We're blocked in the tower. It's threatening to collapse at any moment.
Sale Base to Segura Tower. Message received. Are there any injured? Do you have supplies? How long do you think the tower can hold?
Segura Tower to Sally Base. No one injured. One woman ill and in need of medical attention. We have enough water and supplies. I think the tower won't survive another storm, Captain.
Captain Clams from Sale Base to Segura Tower. Your message is received. Your condition is not urgent. Our 3 speedboats are 2 days by sea from Segura. They're busy evacuating the injured and those in danger of death by order of priority. Our only helicopter is grounded due to the weather. I cannot promise you anything for the moment. Over.
What the hell? We're not an urgent priority. They're leaving us to figure it out for ourselves. Super.
It's normal, Lorenzo. We're in a difficult situation, but it's not hopeless. The Maldivians are far worse off than us. We ought to find an alternative.
You're right. I'm thinking of something. But with this awful weather...
What are you thinking of, Lorenzo?
Oh, it's just a stupid idea.
Qual era a sua ideia estúpida?
I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
You're a cop, you're taking fingerprints. What could be more normal?
Por que ele
Thanks.
quis as impressões? Que ele não queria mais?
Did you know that this was a flood zone when you built this tower?
Not at all. It's a catastrophe. And I don't think it's just going to be a single flood. It's far more serious. I think that this island is on its way to sinking into the ocean.
Excuse me, I am distracted. I have what I need. See you later.
Agora ele já perguntou tudo, mas eu tô estranhando que agora ele pegou as impressões digitais. Acho que eu tinha que insistir com a Sônia também. Agora o advogado também sumiu. E ainda tem essas coisas dos livros em espanhol ali. Que a gente ainda não sabe que enigma é esse. Ou pelo menos eu não sei. Quando eu descobrir, a Bá vai dizer: claro que era isso, eu já sabia desde o começo do jogo. Não, aqui todas as gavetas abrem. Não, com a faca ele tirou o fundo falso dessa gaveta e tem um livro agora, um caderno para ele pegar. Que coisa, não deu indicação nenhuma, não tinha pista nenhuma disso. Dossiê de Walter Jones sobre seus herdeiros. Segorá, 11 de maio de 2005. Realmente não posso aguentar mais a covardia e despreocupação de Billy. Sempre viveu às expensas do seu pai, sem fazer nada com sua vida. Se dedicou ao pôquer durante anos e está afogado em dívidas. Essa manhã me chamou chorando, reclamando para que lhe desse $375 mil. Billy me pediu que lhe ajudasse, explicando que já havia tomado emprestados $250 mil do pai da sua esposa Clara, cuja consultora se encontra em crise. Essa informação não caiu em ouvidos surdos. Tenho que falar com Noland a esse respeito. A verdade é que não me arrependo de haver-lhe mandado passear, dizendo-lhe que é um poço sem fundo de dívidas e que dar-lhe uma lustrada, dar-lhe alguma coisa, seria a pior ajuda que eu poderia dar-lhe para curá-lo dessa enfermidade. Espero que essa lição o obrigue a repensar a sua forma de viver a vida. Sagorá, 12 de maio de 2005. Aprecio especialmente a Clara. É uma jovem franca e direta e sempre senti simpatia por ela. Não obstante, creio que cometeu um grave erro ao envolver a consultoria do seu pai para liquidar as dívidas de jogo de Billy. Ela deve haver sido muito ingênua e estúpida para pensar que Billy devolveria no prazo de 3 meses. Sei que ela me odeia por não haver feito nada para sacá-los do aperto. Tenho que recordar a Hubert que averigue através do advogado judicial o valor dos ativos da empresa do pai dela. Seria uma tonteria esperar que essa pequena empresa familiar vá a pique sem dar-lhe uma mão. Tem que ser realista. Os negócios são os negócios. Segorá, 3 de fevereiro de 2005. Marco e sua prostituta acabam de sair. Estou fora de mim. Não consigo entender como Marco pode ter se deixado engatar por essa menina que apresenta como sua noiva, essa tal Cristina. Um nome falso, suponho. Essa menina se faz passar por ex-supermodelo e, na realidade, já o comprovei, é só uma prostituta de luxo que o seduziu em um hotel onde ele estava ficando, né? Desse modo, pôde sair da Rússia, donde se poderia conseguir o bilhete que estava esperando para ir aos Estados Unidos. Essa menina, demasiado formosa e inteligente, não é mais que uma farsante. Não me deixei enganar pelo seu encantador númerozinho, que só pretende organizar um bonito matrimônio com Marco para pôr suas mãos na minha herança. Não se pode ensinar truques novos a um cachorro velho. Sagorá, 22 de março de 2006. Eu acreditei em Marco muito tempo e sempre o considerei um homem sagaz e inteligente. Não movi um dedo para ajudar-lhe a entrar em Harvard, onde se graduou com honra. Me sinto orgulhoso de havê-lo eleito para defender meus interesses e os do partido na Câmara dos Representantes. Espero poder contar com ele para obter os direitos de renovação do mercado para os hospitais públicos do Texas. Inverti muito dinheiro nos preparativos desta condenada campanha. Estou começando a perguntar-me se estou apostando no cavalo adequado. Segorá, 3 de abril de 2006. Não gostei nada da chamada telefônica que acabo de receber de Marco. Me incomoda profundamente sua cegueira e seu empenho em pôr em perigo sua carreira política com essa prostitutazinha de Cristina Bronsky. Marco é débil, fraco, né? E duvido que seja capaz de pôr fim a essa relação. Terei que neutralizar essa farsante que está começando a custar-me muito caro. Segorá, 3 de março de 2006. Sempre apreciei a independência e o espírito rebelde de Sônia. Em muitos aspectos, me recorda a obstinada oposição de meu pobre filho Edward. Sei que Sônia tratará de impor-se, embora esteja motivada pelo desejo de vingar-se contra mim. Sempre recordarei a cena em que chamei a Edward parasita e perdedor frente a Isabel e aos meninos. Sônia, que só tinha 7 anos, me lançou uma sopa na cara, dizendo que jamais envergonhara seu pai, que era muito melhor pessoa do que eu. Sei que Sônia nunca será um títere em minhas mãos, apesar de todos meus intentos de tentá-la com minha herança. Certamente Sônia é a única que respeito entre todos os meus netos. Claro, jogou sopa.
Charming, these relationships between various members of the Jones family.
Jogou sopa na cara dele, com toda a razão. Sabia que seu avô gostava muito de você?
I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
If one absolutely has to go through this, let's do it.
Thanks.
Tomou as digitais dela.
We're in a sensitive zone here. The people learned to protect themselves from nature's fury, but now it's taking on very disquieting proportions.
Why did Jones speak of your desire for revenge against him?
Mr. Norm, I will never forget, you hear me, never, that day. The day when I was able to restore some dignity to my father, who was humiliated by this jerk Walter Jones. And if I'd had a shorter temper, I would have killed my grandfather that day. It was everything he deserved. Yes, I would have so liked to kill Walter Jones.
I get it.
Poxa, isso quando ela tinha 7 anos de idade, hein? Jogou sopa, mas na verdade queria matá-lo. Essa é uma mulher pra gente casar. Clara e Billy. Aqui tem alguma coisa para pegar. Não era cofre ali, era o ar-condicionado no quarto. Carta convite aos herdeiros de Walter Jones. Queridos netos, chegou a hora da reconciliação e sossegamento. Minha saúde está débil e não quero pôr ponto final a nossas e eu quero pôr ponto final nas nossas disputas. Os convido a dar-me o prazer de vossa companhia em 8 de junho e passar uma semana comigo em Sagorá. Uma ocasião para relaxarmos e descobrirmos a ilha que logo será o paraíso de vocês. Queria também aproveitar a ocasião para falarmos de minha última disposição testamentária. Seu avô, Walter Jones. Fora isso... Não.
Well, all this is very touching.
Tudo isso é muito comovedor. Comovente. Quarto. Olha lá, aqui é o ar-condicionado, eu acho, mas não tem ação. Seja ar-condicionado, seja cofre.
This suitcase is closed.
Cristina e Marco. E ele vai entrando lá no quarto dela.
Calm down, Christina. We are all well and alive. You are alive, I am alive, Marco is well, everyone is well.
As duas estão aí conversando, Clara e Cristina.
I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
You want my fingerprints, Jack? It's amusing, but it's also very messy, Jack.
Thanks. From now on, you have to show more cooperation, because I am officially investigating a murder. What did Walter Jones tell you regarding his estate?
Marco doesn't tell me everything, you know. He still keeps some small secrets from me.
You are not a forensic expert, right? So you can't help me at all in interpreting Walter Jones' autopsy report.
It's true that it's not my domain, but it seems like it gets you going, Jack. They say that cops are excited by the smell of crime.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
One way or another, Jones is dead, Jack. For me, it changes nothing. For little Baena, it's different, of course. She is less guilty than before.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I played poker with Billy and Martin all evening. Then I left to go to sleep and found Marco already asleep. It must have been between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. Sonia was very hostile to me because she didn't like seeing me playing and chatting with Martin. At one point she went out to calm down.
If the heirs had thought of inheriting, it seems they're off to a rather rocky start. What do you think?
This man detested me, Jack, and I didn't love him either. He wanted me to leave. Marco didn't want to leave me, so Walter Jones made him pay. There, you have it all.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
Ask Marco, he knows better than me. It's his family's affair, you understand.
I get the impression that Walter Jones didn't particularly appreciate you. Am I mistaken?
I'll tell you a story, Jack. One evening in Houston, as I was leaving the movie theater, I was attacked by a man. He hit me and slashed my face. It was one of Walter Jones's hitmen, I am sure of it. The guy said, "Go away, you dirty communist slut. Go back home to Russia. It's the last warning. You understand that, you bitch? Next time you'll be dead." And he stuck his knife into my cheek. Of course, it was the old goat Jones who wanted to intimidate me, to force me to leave Marco. He thought that it would injure his political career if I was seen around him.
If I may permit myself, Christina, I believe that Jones was unfair to you. Do you believe that you can get your hands on at least a small piece of the estate now that he's dead?
I am not an heir. And then, Marco and I, we are not yet married. If you know of a formula that will allow me to have this old jerk's money, then you have to let me know right away, Jack.
Sorry, I don't know. Do you think Walter Jones's fears about you were justified, miss?
Maybe. I don't know, Jack. There are people who like me and others who don't. But Marco was ready to leave politics because of his love for me. He told me this often.
Christina, this page from Jones's diary about the assault on you seems totally like a confession to me. What do you think?
Of course it doesn't surprise me. Walter Jones didn't have the courage to do the dirty work himself. I was beaten and given a death threat by a hired hand because the son of a bitch wanted to force me to leave Marco because he's a Republican candidate and I wasn't a woman suited to a future senator. Jack, life was not always easy for me. When I lived in Russia, it was sometimes really hard. So it doesn't really frighten me to have the blade of a knife pointed at me, understand? I would have loved to kill this pig of a Jones myself. Yes, I regret it.
Todas as moças bonitas queriam tê-lo matado pessoalmente. E dizem que perderam essa chance.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
I don't know, Jack. Really.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I don't know, Jack.
I get it.
This storm scares me, Jack. I hope that we are going to get out of here as quickly as possible.
Excuse me, I am distracted. I have what I need. See you later.
O que ele roubou dela aqui? Caixa de condoms, camisinhas russas. Uma caixa de camisinhas aberta. Camisinhas da Rússia. Marca Spotan. Vai perguntar para ela o que você estava fazendo com essas camisinhas usadas. Usadas não. Começadas, aberta, caixa aberta.
I would like to ask you 2 or 3 questions. In our times, it's wise to go out with men who use precaution. Who is the last man who had the honor of using this prophylactic in the tower?
It's my private life, Jack. And moreover, condoms are not a misdemeanor, I think. Quite to the contrary.
I'm sure I'll be back to ask for clarifications.
Cara metido, o que ele vai achar que isso tem a ver? Pode ter a ver com a investigação. Tudo pode ter, segundo Abá, tudo na vida tem uma ligação. E tudo no crime também. Clara, me conte aí, você que tem essa fama de boazinha.
I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
My fingerprints? Because you seriously think I'm a murderer, Inspector?
Thanks. I warn you, the rules have changed. I am the inspector officially in charge of the investigation of the murder of Walter Jones, and I therefore have all powers at my disposal to bring this investigation to a close. What did Walter Jones tell you regarding his estate?
Walter Jones completely changed his attitude with his grandchildren. He wanted to bequeath them all his money. Well, so much the better. But after all the terrible things he did to them, it's a little late.
You are not a forensic expert, right? So you can't help me at all in interpreting Walter Jones' autopsy report.
I can't help you, Inspector. I don't know anything. You know, I detested that evil old man. Even if now I am starting to feel a little pity for him.
E ela também, até a boazinha vai lamentar não ter matado ele.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baina has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
I don't know, Baina, but I have a good instinct about these people. And frankly, I don't see her scheming something so horrific. But I am a little lost with all this, Inspector.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I was at the restaurant from 9:45 p.m. to 11 p.m. I cleared the table with Sonia, I washed the dishes, and cleaned up. If you must know, I'm fed up with being their maid. I had a fight with Billy because he was playing poker. It's crazy. He keeps on playing as if he didn't kick up enough trouble in my life and in my father's, too, with his gambling debts. It drives me nuts, but he just doesn't listen. After that, the maid prepared food for the next day. That was my evening, Inspector.
With regard to Walter Jones, everyone plays the victim. But some people didn't refrain from trying to make him fall from his perch.
I won't pretend to be indignant with you, Inspector. Jones did everything he could to push his grandchildren down this route. He deserved it, that old shark. Believe me.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
You ought to speak to Billy, Inspector. I don't get mixed up with the family affairs of my husband.
What is the connection between Walter Jones and your father's consulting firm?
You're certainly well informed, Inspector. Walter Jones is responsible for the collapse of my father's consulting firm. The jerk didn't want to help Billy, who was in danger of being finished off by the Russian mafia because of some gambling debts. The old man wouldn't lift a finger, and it was my father who absorbed Billy's debts. He did it for me, of course, but he counted on Billy repaying him in the shortest possible time. Obviously, Billy wasn't able to reimburse him. That put my father's business in difficulty. The poor man had a heart attack, and in fact, he almost died, you know. He's still not out of that mess. And guess what? The Jones Company is in line to buy my father's firm. I dreamed of strangling Jones, Inspector. Yes, I really dreamed it.
É, com certeza todas as moças bonitas queriam acabar com ele. E de certo os cachorros brancos também. Seria uma matéria para a revista Desfile. A revista das mulheres bonitas e cachorros brancos, segundo o narrador Escovinha da rádio Estúdio Musical.
I get the impression that Walter Jones was not very affectionate with you.
Walter Jones knew that my father's health was poor after the payment of his consulting office was stopped, and he didn't do anything about it, even though he was a self-made man just like my father. He could have tried to understand that for my father all would be lost, especially because this was all because of Billy, Inspector. Yes, Jones was a monster, a cruel and heartless man.
All this seems to indicate that Billy got himself in a real soup, and his family with him. What do you think?
It is, above all, Walter Jones who got us into that soup, Inspector. That old jackal was in no position to give lessons in morality, believe me. It was he who never wanted to absorb the debts of my husband. Walter Jones, one of the richest men in the world, didn't let go of a cent for his grandson.
I didn't think Jones was such a jerk. And his accomplice, Nolan, doesn't seem to be much better.
As far as I'm concerned, Walter Jones can burn in hell, Inspector. And Nolan deserves no better. He's the one who advised his boss to let my father's consulting firm collapse to pieces so that they could buy it at a throwaway price.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
This is a man's chain. It reminds me of something, but I really don't know what.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I don't remember at all, Inspector.
After all, why not?
Agora eu acho que eu tenho que voltar lá na Sônia, né? Que agora eu li o diário do cara.
I'm all yours, Inspector Norm. I mean, in a manner of speaking.
Sou toda sua, mas isso é só uma forma de falar, viu? Não vá ficando todo animadinho.
What did Walter Jones tell you regarding his estate?
My grandfather brought us together to tell us about his will. He told us that we, my brothers and I, were his heirs. It might be true, but it doesn't change my feelings for him in any way. You can't buy me, Mr. Norm.
I thank you for your help.
Então é isso. Por hoje, paramos aqui. O Exou Biribó, agradecendo a presença, o apoio, as dicas, a torcida, desejando boa noite, até amanhã. Por enquanto eu fui.